to this meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Paul Heath and I'm the Chairman of this committee. I will now go through a few items of housekeeping before we proceed with the main business of the meeting. We are not expecting a fire alarm this evening, but should one sound, please can members use the exits to the rear of the chamber and assemble in the car park. Please could I ask that everyone turns their phones and devices to silent, and if members wish to speak during our debates this evening, please can you indicate by raising your hand and I will come to you at the appropriate time. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and to switch them off when they have finished. Could I also remind you that this meeting is being webcasted. I will now proceed with the main business of the meeting. Item number 1 is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. So we have received apologies from Councillor Abbott, Councillor Beavis and Councillor Parker, and Councillor Van Dolken is substituting for Councillor Parker, but we are not aware of any other apologies. Thank you, Chairman.
We're apart from them. The rest of us are all here, aren't we?
Yes.
Thank you. Yep. Right, so if there are no further apologies, I will proceed with agenda item 2, which is the declaration of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interest or non-registrable interest they wish to declare this evening? If so, please state the item and the nature of your interest. Thank you. So there are no declarations, so we will proceed to item number 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes as an accurate record of our meeting held on the 25th of January 2025. Councillor Ramage, thank you. And the seconded Councillor Taylor, thank you. The minutes have been moved and seconded as an accurate record. All those in favour, please show. Thank you, that is unanimous. I should just sign them. Thank you, Jess.
Chair, can I just ask a quick question? Forgive me if I'm... As far as the presentation we're going to be seeing, do we ask questions at the end or can we ask through the middle of it or what?
We will be guided by the people that are presenting.
Yeah. And can I wish everybody a happy St George's Day?
No, you can't, Councillor Ramage. Right. Item number 4 is the public question time. We have no registered speakers for this evening, so therefore we will proceed with item number 5, which is the scrutiny review into the North Essex Parking Partnership evidence gathering session. Item number 5, scrutiny review. Members, for this item I am very pleased to welcome the following officers from the North Essex Parking Partnership to the meeting. Richard Walker, Head of Parking, and Jake England, Group Operating Manager. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Richard and Jake will shortly be providing a presentation to the committee to assist in our evidence gathering for the scrutiny review into the NEP. In order to support members' discussion this evening further, I also draw the committee's attention to the information document which has kindly been prepared by Richard and circulated to all committee members in advance of this meeting. In addition, our terms of reference for this scrutiny review are set out in the agenda as a reminder. Welcome, Richard and Jake. Please can I invite you to introduce yourselves and commence with your presentations. I will invite questions from the members at the end of the presentation, unless you wish to take them as we're going through them. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the kind invitation. And yeah, if you've got something burning that you'd like to stop and ask us on the way through, it may be that we answer it partway through the presentation, but by all means stop, raise a hand, and we'll come across to you certainly. So we've prepared a short presentation first, and that's backed up by quite a lot of notes. There was an amount of questions that was put to us, and it'll become obvious why I've divided those into columns when we come to look at that at the end. There were a few pieces that didn't really fit in the run of that at all, that we just wanted to amplify and introduce who we are and what we do. So point that over there somewhere. There we go. My name is Richard Walker. I'm the head of parking for the North Essex Parking Partnership. I've got a couple of other roles that I'll cover in a minute as well. I'm joined by Jake England tonight. The group that we manage, there's I at the top, head of service, and Jake, Trevor, and Trevor's in for Danielle at the moment. I also have a couple of other roles in that I'm currently president of the British Parking Association this year, and I've just been elected to the board of chair of the board of directors for the next 3 years of the Parking Association. So we're connected at sort of national level with different things besides being just NEP as well. I chair a couple of other national groups too. So Jake's our group operating manager, and we'll go into a bit more detail about how the teams are structured in a minute. Jake's, thanks for postponing this meeting as well, as Jake's recently had a baby born in the last few weeks, and that was the reason for setting this meeting back a little bit, partly to get over the brand new human to look after. And talking of paternity leave and maternity leave, Danielle's been off and has a child as well, and will be back returning with us next week, and for which Trevor's been in and covering for the group development manager role for the last, well, around about a year, isn't it? Underneath there we've got operations managers, so we have a frontline workers side of things, which we'll go into in a bit more detail in a minute. We have a back office, which Lou oversees. I don't have a picture of Shane. He's not been in the right place at the right time yet. But Shane runs our engineering team, and that includes the technical team, which look after pay and display machines, the assets and bits and pieces. Anything to add at that stage, Jake?
No, nothing to add. As said, we'll go into the teams in a second, give you a bit more detail on those. Right,
On we go. We've been running shared services since 2008. Right at the very start, we had a shared service arrangement. I think Braintree was approached by Uttlesford, and then both Braintree and Uttlesford approached Colchester. We had a little parking partnership back in 2007-8, started up. That was looking after off-street only. And that ran for a couple of years, and the county had lots of agency agreements across the county, 12 different agency agreements, one with each district, so there was quite a lot of duplication in that. And at that time, county was looking to make some efficiencies. It had run up quite a large deficit in the year as well, more than £1 million. And at that time, all of the districts were approached to come up with a better way of doing things than the old way of it. We all got together, and I stood up and proposed, well, we've got this little parking partnership. What if we sort of expanded that idea, and you have a lead authority, and all the other districts in that area can form a grouping. We'll have a joint committee, and we'd already got with Braintree and Uttlesford, and we could get together and run this as a set of shared services. Unfortunately, that's what happened. There's a South Essex Parking Partnership as well, which is the other 6 you can see in grey at the bottom of the screen there, and the 6 in our area, which is quite a large area, something like 75 miles by 45 miles. So I have people working inside the M25 on a day, people working by the big London airport in our patch around Stansted, right over to the coast, Harwich and Clacton. So a big patch, takes about 2.5–3 hours to drive right across it from one end to the other. We report into a joint committee. That's for the on-street. We'll talk about on-street versus off-street in a bit. And our area is large. We've got a base in Harlow, which covers the west of our region. We've got a little hub here in Braintree, which we work out of, and then we've got a base in Colchester to serve the eastern districts. What do? We're divided into, as I said, on-street and off-street. I'll use those terms. On-street means the curbside, the public highway, roads, on the roadside, what you'd previously probably know now as traffic wardens service. And we also cover off-street, which is the car parks area. So those are the council's car parks, and including in that some districts as well. So the on-street, we cover 6 district areas, half the county, and that's the roadside function. And there we patrol the yellow lines, white boxes on the roadside. We can issue penalty charge notices, and we operate paid parking at the curbside in some places, a lot of that in Epping and some in Colchester and other places too. And we look after permits and pay and display. We'll go into some more detail about those in a minute as well. We also look after the maintenance of signs and lines and machines at the roadside. and we can make decisions about new traffic regulation orders. They're the bits of legal regulation behind the yellow line, the thing that makes that lawful and allows us to issue penalties on it, but also restricts the types of vehicles that can park either in bays or not. So restricts or permits different things. And we create policy, which is fairly flexible, and we report that to the Joint Committee, and the Joint Committee steers how we drive our policy. On the off-street side, we operate 4 districts worth, the middle 4 of those 6 car park services. It's Colchester, Braintree, Uttlesford and Harlow. And we operate 5 parish council partnerships through those partnerships as well. So we've got places like Wivenhoe and West Mersey. In this area we've got Coggeshall and Hatfield Peveril. And there's 1 or 2 others like Dedham. So we operate parking services, which is the same sort of thing that we're patrolling, just in banks of bays, but this is off-street now, so set up in a slightly different way on a slightly different legislation, so a different part of the legislation. And again, paid parking, we patrol those and we can issue penalty charge notices. Incidentally, stop me if we slide into jargon, because it's very easy. We have a lot of jargon, so if I talk about TROs and PCNs and things and TPT, then stop me if you want some clarification on what I've slipped into. We've a lot of jargon in the sector, unfortunately. We cover machine maintenance. I put floating on there. By that I mean we don't cover any assets in the car parks. We cover the services that are floating above the surface. So we operate patrols and we maintain machines, and we can repaint lines and things by arrangement as well. And all of the assets there and the car parks are owned by the Sovereign Authority, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute too. So we operate as a combined service, both for districts and the county. So we're trying to be unitary authority in doing this, really. We've delegated functions from the county and delegated functions between districts as well, and we're trying to operate in the 2 tiers in one operation. I think somebody put it earlier on, like a spun-in sort of business model, really. So what do we do day to day? We've the joint committee and an operating agreement with the county council. We've got 1 member from each of the districts, each of the cities, districts and county council that sits on that committee, and that forms the joint parking committee. I and all the other officers of NEP report to that joint committee, and we're all employed by a lead authority, which makes things simpler really from a paying conditions point of view, by Colchester City Council, that's the employer. The off-street services, the shared services model underneath that, operates under a service level agreement, and that's for Braintree, Harlow, Uttlesford, and Colchester is itself in that. And then the parish council arrangements operate through those district arrangements, and there we are, those are the parishes that we operate there. So in order to save me from just speaking all the time, I'm going to hand over to Jake and we'll talk about the main areas and the teams a little bit. So I'll hand over to you, Jake.
Yes, thanks, Richard. So 3 core teams at the North Essex Parking Partnership. This follows quite a significant change management that we went through last year, a transformation programme. But 3 core teams: our operations team, our business process team, and our technical team. So we'll start with the operations team. This is the one that most of you will probably know more confidently. That's our civil enforcement officers, or our CEOs as we call them, again more jargon, but otherwise sort of known as traffic wardens. So there's a contact email address for the team at the top there if you ever need that. However, just to sort of, for fullness and transparency, we've got 42 full-time equivalent CEOs across the NEP. And that covers both the on-street and the off-street that Richard referred to earlier. And they're currently working a 4-on, 4-off shift pattern. So effectively, at any one time, we'll have half of those operating. They will patrol schools, yellow lines, permit schemes, car parks, and the list is much, much longer than that, but you get the gist. 3 bases of operations, as Richard alluded to earlier. So we've got 1 here in Braintree at the George Yard car park. We've got 1 in Colchester, and then we've got 1 in Harlow. And again, that's necessary from our perspective because we do have a large rural area that ultimately is then split into different various beats, just to help improve that compliance across those restrictions. So very digital, so we've no more handwritten PCNs, the days of old, so everything is, all the information is collected via computer handhelds and our park safe cars. So that is for technical terms, CCTV car or an approved device as it's called within the legislation. And I can come on to, if there's any questions on that, I can come on to that a bit later. And yeah, as of the financial year just closed, we're issuing in circa 85,000 PCNs in that year. Next team is our business process team. So this is our sort of single administrative team. So they're the ones that are covering all the PCN processing, anything from appeals and cancellations, payments, debt recovery. And that's ultimately in line, firstly, with regulations, then statutory guidance, then local policy. And that local policy for the on-street function and off-street ultimately is agreed as part of our joint parking committee as well. They are also handling any customer contact, emails, telephones. We have our own telephone team, so we have much more specialist knowledge than just a general customer service centre. But they're also dealing with freedom of information requests, subject access requests, and any other administrative work that comes in, so financial reconciliation, management of all the permits that we've got. So just the other day when dealing with a complaint, I checked the permit system when at that point in time, we had 18,000 active permits at that particular point in time. So we're managing a huge number of permits at any one time, both on and off street. And then as part of that team, we then have a bit of client relationship. So that's managing the SLAs that we've got with the 4 districts I mentioned, and then those other partnership agreements that are underneath. And then across the year, on street at least, we're issuing just shy of 10,000 resident permits and business permits, and over 200,000 visitor permits across last year. And then finally is our technical team. So in the grand scheme of things, this is, of the 3 teams, this is probably our newest team, but it's still in itself well established. This team is dealing with the maintenance of lines, signs, machines, both on and off street. But they're also dealing with the traffic regulation orders that we mentioned earlier, the TROs. So this is the new parking restrictions, pushing them through the policy that we have at our joint parking committee. And ensuring that there's a local influence on those decisions that are going to JPC. We've also got smaller things like temporary TROs. We saw a lot of that come in with the COVID pandemic. As we all know, everyone rushed to green spaces, forests, which required some quick temporary work to go into safeguard those areas and try to manage the influx of parking. We also do suspensions, that's to enable things like scaffolding, any other works that are going on at any properties. And then also things like H-bar applications, so they're the discretionary white bars that go outside driveways if residents and businesses so desire. That's our 3 teams. I'll hand back, I think, to Richard, unless you want me to.
Thank you very much. So on a day-to-day basis, we report up to the Joint Committee. We've got some key performance indicators in there that we always report, such as parking income against our budget target, our net budget position, and our on-street parking income, which is residents parking and pay and display. Those are all reported up to the Joint Committee, and the Joint Committee minutes and everything else that I'm mentioning here is all available on the NEP website, north.parkingpartnership.org. We've got some service level targets as well, and we report quarterly in our operational reports, and then sum those up annually into an annual report and details of that. And we've won awards for being open and transparent in the way we do this as well through our adjudication service. Annual reports are also published online. There we go. Oh, too far. Look at that. We've got 2. So in the coming year, year we've just started, 25-26, we've got a business plan and some programme of works to be done. And we slipped into a deficit position just after the pandemic. And prior to the pandemic, we were in a very healthy position indeed. But we could only reclaim a percentage of a percentage during the pandemic, and following that, changes in rates of things we had to buy and so on. Inflation was interesting for a time, and we slid just into deficit for 1 year, and we're about to pay off that deficit completely now and back into surplus. So we try to manage things around about break even if we can. We've got to monitor the recovery from the pandemic because things have changed. Parking behaviours changed during the pandemic, and that's stuck, particularly around long stay parking. People working from home and things. If you only work from home for 1 day a week, that's 20% of your revenue likely to have disappeared from car parks, for instance. So we're looking at trends in that. We maintain our operational focus on attendance levels. You might imagine that most of our people are frontline workers. And get all sorts of abuse and things hurled at them, but they're also out in all sorts of weathers as well, from snow and sleet right through into inclement heat and different things going on. So our people out on the front line do report a bit of sickness and absence, but we're focused on operating as a team and supporting them through different things. The rest of things on there, we have to operate within our statutory guidance. And we've a pretty good policy, it has to be said, which is really focused on the outcome of other cases at the adjudication service. So we've got a reasonable set of policies for the way we deal with things when it comes to penalty charge notices. We monitor the performance indicators at the Joint Committee. We operate against the data. We've got a lot of data that comes into the service, both from the things that we collect and the things as we're patrolling, but also pay and display machines and all the system stuff that comes into us in car parks and payments and the like. And then we operate the schemes with the off-street partners and looking at our contractual arrangements as we go on through tendering, because we're the centre of excellence for operating everything. So we have some fairly large and consequential tenders for things. Our operating system is going to be reviewed next year. We have a programme of essential maintenance works, which we have a small budget for, repairing signs and lines. We keep on top of that. We've got some park safe cameras. Jake mentioned the cars. We've got some fixed camera sites as well, which we want to do to relaunch and do something different with during the next 12 months or so. And we have a Colchester master plan, which I've been working a good portion of my time, which is costed into Colchester, to look after things like our estate plan and structures and projects. We've currently got £1 million project undergo to support 2 40-year-old concrete car parks, multi-stories in the city of Colchester. And we've had input into the Uttlesford parking strategy, where they're managing traffic and parking caused by fly parking from the airport and such like there. So we're looking at some off-street details there as well. And most importantly, I think we're looking around the corner at local government reform, because that could render our agreement that we have with the county pointless, really, because we won't need to be, because we'll be the county. The county will be abolished and the new unitary will be both district and county. So what we're trying to be at the moment by using some regulations, we will just be the same authority, and that will make things so much easier for us. We won't need an agreement, might not need a joint committee, we'll just report into the council that we are as a unitary. So that'll be a lot better when that comes around. As I said, our service operates autonomously and we report to our client officers and the joint committee. So Esme's here, one of our client officers. Report to Esme Braintree here and across the other districts as well for the off-street and also in the on-street as well. I mentioned that we operate 15 different council arrangements in 3 tiers of local government, so that'll be eased when we get round the corner to local government reform. There are some challenges because all of our operation is dependent on the income that we get, and we only get income from penalty charges, residence permits and on-street pay and display, and salaries have been increasing all the time, and our penalty charge level hasn't changed. I think it changed in 2015, but it was put down at that point, not up. And of course London's penalty charge level has just gone up, and in that there's a bit of a deterrent effect as well. But we rely pretty much 65% of our service relies on income from PCNs at the moment. There are some opportunities I mentioned earlier on from local government reform and unitary status. in that all the authorities will be one and the same, and that'll cut out some bureaucracy that we currently have to deal with. On the on-street, we want to look to diversify our revenue streams as far as we can. We want to modernise and automate things as far as we can as well, the camera systems, but also some other processes and systems to try and ensure the integrity of the data that we collect. And we want to mitigate some of the risks. The Joint Committee owns its own risk register. We're frequently audited. Just end of February, we were through that. And we've had a transformation programme where we took a lot of cost out of the service to gain some more efficiency from it, to move forward and try and mitigate against the increased salary costs versus the sort of level income from the penalty charge level. So we've been sort of fairly agile as we've gone with that, and the on-street is completely contained within that. There's nothing else that supports that at all. In the off-street, I mentioned, there we are, we're engaging the Scrutiny panel, that's this meeting. Colchester, we're leading the repair and maintenance of 2 multi-stories, the main car parks in Colchester. In Harlow, we've been supporting the town centre regeneration programme. And in Ettlesford, we've been consulting on the Stansted Airport parking review. So we don't just patrol lines and signs and things, but we get involved in quite a lot of other things which have a load of benefit for residents and citizens too. And that's about it from me. So I'm happy to take any questions on that. We've also prepared you some sort of thought starters in questions and answers piece around your terms of reference as well. So you should have a long document too which answers some other questions and just bits and pieces of things that came to mind. So there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you both for your presentation. Members, we will now commence with questions. Before we begin, can I remind members that your questions should relate to the points within our terms of reference and contents of the presentation provided this evening, not individual parking issues or complaints. Thank you. Councillor Holland, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is just a brief one. You said that you listed the revenue streams into your organisation. I've seen documents in the past which suggest to me that you're acting as a consultative body for councils outside this county that produces a revenue stream. Why didn't you list it there?
Yes, on occasion we've been approached by them. It's not something we promote generally, but we'll work in partnership. The Traffic Management Act that we operate under encourages to work together as authorities, and some of that started out as a bit of a benchmarking exercise, which I think I pointed out in there, probably didn't mention it. We had a benchmarking exercise with Gloucestershire, where we started out looking at some other things we did. We've done some work with Norfolk as well, and that built on the benchmarking, and as a result of that there was some consultancy work involved with that. But compared with the £2 million worth of income, the £10,000 that we got with that wasn't huge in comparison. So these pieces of work come along on a bit of an ad hoc basis. We did some work with Baber and Mid Suffolk as well, as they were looking at parking charges and things, particularly in Baber, but also looking at that. So when these opportunities present themselves, yeah, we've got a bit of a centre of excellence, so we're lucky enough to support, you know, a team that's got quite a lot of knowledge amongst itself, and other authorities on occasion will ask us different things, and we'll go outside as a sort of consultancy basis. So yeah, it doesn't happen often, but when it does, yeah, we'll deal with it.
Councillor Martin, please.
Hi. So talking generally, not naming specific schools, but generally speaking, what is your, I've noticed on your presentation you've got parking outside schools. So what is your like procedure and your relationship with schools in how you deal with what is such a hot potato really, you know, poor parking outside schools, blocking in residents who live nearby, making it safe for children to cross. Obviously your organisation, I would have thought, has got quite a bit of involvement there. So what is the process and procedure for the relationship with schools with regard to that?
Okay, I'll start off, and no doubt Jake will fill in the gaps that I miss out. So across our area we've got 303 schools, and they're all calls on our time, all at the same time, very focused around about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning and 3:30-ish in the afternoon. And we try to get to as many of those as we can. Now, if you think about what's going on there, a lot of the time schools will have some zigzags outside, and those are a no stopping restriction, so that's the highest level on our hierarchy. And as soon as something stops on there, there's an instant penalty charge notice could be issued. But there's traffic and all sorts of things going on. So we tend to try and send groups of 2 civil enforcement officers to a school at one time, so we can sort of manage what's going on there. Yellow lines that haven't got a loading restriction on them, we're getting into the technicalities of this now, but we have to conduct an observation on those. So whilst all this is going on, and people are asking us questions, and there's this melee of other traffic going around, we're trying to observe cars and all the rest of it. But also, generally, when we turn up on a foot patrol, lots of people will behave themselves. We're looking for contraventions against the regulations of the yellow lines and the boxes. Beyond that, we don't have any jurisdiction except for parking across driveways where they're completely blocked. So the side roads and all this displacement parking, now that schools have got quite a lot bigger within their own footprint, is a different matter, and obstruction's a matter for the police still at the moment. We haven't mentioned footway parking and all the rest of it. That's still a matter for the police at the moment. I'll circuit back to that if we've got time at the end, and a couple of other issues. Engagement with schools, there's a couple of things we do. We've the 3 camera cars that Jake mentioned, and they're limited in their ability to only be able to manage the zigzag lines. They can't manage the yellow lines nearby, but they can enforce the zigzags, and bus stops as well if they're nearby, and a few other things that aren't relevant to this, but there's only 5 things cars can do, and everything else we have to do as a foot patrol. So if you do the maths with 42 officers and 303 schools, and we send them in 2s, and sometimes there's a shift in and a shift not, there's lots of ground to cover with fairly limited resources. We try and encourage schools to get involved in this as well. We had a scheme called 3PR, 3 parking rules, part with consideration and caution and so on. That was something that we championed within the school and got the children involved. So hopefully to bring the next generation along with people. And then there are all sorts of schemes that Essex have going under their currently Healthy School Streets banner to do with things like park and stride, safely to school, walking buses, and there's about 7 or 8 different things with that are involved in with the school, crossing patrols and so on. So yeah, do you want to add anything to that little list and how we go about it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate, I think the finite resources that we've got outside schools, and I think it's probably fair to say that the safety of children and vulnerable adults directly outside the school, where the clearways or red routes, red lines might be, is going to be their priority in most cases. And that, hence why in the past we've lent on 3PR to try and deal with some of the residual effects that go on in the neighbouring roads and with residents. Referring back to that 2-tier relationship that we've got with the county, they have their Healthy School Streets, which is their active and sustainable travel initiative, and that in itself is a spectrum of work. You'll have seen in some of the news, certainly in London, but there's some authorities outside of London now trialling it, where they're completely closing roads off, streets off, in a bid to make those environments safer. That is part of their Healthy School Streets programme, however yet to sort of hit that point really in a large scale effect. They're trying to use the other initiatives to change the attitudes and behaviours of motorists first, in coordination again with our enforcement that goes on before they get to the point of just closing the road off, because that's quite drastic if you in the grand scheme of things. So 3PR is a scheme that we've mothballed at the moment. Ultimately, it was part of our transformation that I alluded to earlier, agreed by the Joint Parking Committee. Ultimately, it didn't sit within our core statutory function. If you go back to actually enforcement of parking restrictions in that sense. At that point in time, we recommended that we sit on that rather than invest money and potentially have a financial impact on all the partners that were the part of the committee, with the intention, however, of returning to that if we did return to surplus, because it's a good news story. We actually had a really good dedicated member of staff that engaged with schools. He went in. We had a funny outfit that the primary school aged children enjoyed engaging with, and in our opinion had a really positive effect. But unfortunately, finances permitted that we had to sort of sit on the back burner for now. But we do have aspirations to return to that.
Thank you. Councillor Ramage, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. You mentioned about you trying to modernise the system, and one of the things that's recently been occurring, not just here in the areas you're responsible for, is QR codes on parking machines. I've got a couple of concerns there. One, there seems to be a lot of fake ones being put on machines. Question to that is how you're dealing with that. Are you monitoring it? And two, our senior citizens in the country, well, you know, they just can't handle those sort of technology. And what are you doing to cater for them and being sympathetic towards them? I mean, because they're an important part of our community, and more often than not, they do the best they can with technology, but they're not always there with it, you know. So I just wondered if you've taken that on board and you're dealing with it in an appropriate manner. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, I'll start and Jake will fill in the detail if he can. So we don't use QR codes in North Essex Parking Partnership on the machines at all. For the very reason you said, there was a bit of fraud going around. There's also some fraud going around through text messages and emails and things like that saying you have a penalty, click this if you want to find out a bit more about it. That was just fraud, frankly. So don't click on messages that have come from unknown sources, and certainly not in text messages. There's been some national publicity around all of this as well, as you sort of alluding to there. So every day our enforcement officers around machines and things, and they'll test the machine before they go on into the car park. All of our car parks at the moment, bar one or two, have machines as well as My Permit. My Permit, which is our cashless operating system, has, well, the pandemic probably concertinaed in 5 years worth of progress with that, in that it took off massively during the pandemic, to the point where it's almost completely replaced coin in every place now, even where it's a voluntary choice amongst people. Card use has carried on at around about a quarter throughout, and we've carried on with card machines in places for that very reason. Some people like to use a card machine. The older you get as well, if you have mobility problems, of course you can get a blue badge, and that exempts you from some of the things too. So yeah, there's the blue badge issue, and display that, and you're outside some of the charging, but always check, because some authorities do and some don't, and some places do and some don't. So that's the other thing to look at if you've got to a point where mobility is getting a bit difficult. But yeah, card we've kept in. But My Permit isn't just an app-based thing. You can ring and speak to a real person as well if you've got a mobile phone, if you need one of those. You can book your parking in advance through My Permit as well. So you can ask for today or tomorrow if you know you're going to be parking somewhere. That's what my dad does. He goes online and books his space in advance because he knows he's going out to park tomorrow. Yeah, so other options. Jake.
I think worth harking back to the presentation, there's an on-street and off-street split. So off-street, you know, with certainly for Braintree, you have the luxury of being a bit more general in terms of what you offer, a bit more control over what you offer. On the street, we've got a very boring document, but it'll probably help you sleep at night, that essentially regulates on-street signage. As Richard mentioned, that we won't have QR codes on that because it's not part of that regulation. In car parks, however, there is on some tariff boards within an EP area, and again it comes down to that specific authority as whether they want a QR code there or not, that links to My Permit. We've yet to have any complaints of the QR codes that are displayed in any NEP managed car parks, that they link off to fraudulent activity. But we have a dedicated team, as I mentioned, a technical team that are going out into the car parks, monitoring the machines, monitoring the line conditions and lines and signs and tariff boards, and they're aware of the fraud that's ongoing, and if they see it, they just peel it straight off. So you know, obviously there's no data necessarily behind that I can call upon, but, you know, a reminder that if at any point there's a Braintree decision locally that within car parks you don't want any QR codes for that very reason, then that's a conversation point, I think, for Esme and us to talk about. But on the street, there's regulation on that signage anyway as to what we can and cannot display. And yeah, I won't get into the details of that, but I can...
You mentioned signage there. I can remember an incident where I was district councillor here in Braintree Town Centre, and an elderly couple, I won't emphasise it, but basically they were parking in a part of the street where they thought it was safe to park. They also had a disabled badge. Turns out they get a fine, but it turns out the reason why all this was wrong was because the signage was out of date on the street. Is that something you look at all the time, just making sure that all the signage around the whole patch is up to date? Because obviously those sort of incidents can happen where people get confused because they see one thing when you're saying it's got to be something else.
Yeah, very good question. So we, was it 2016 we consolidated all the orders?
2016 survey, 2017, I think.
Yeah, so we went for a hefty piece of work, essentially. So all of the orders beforehand were all written. So it'd say something like this waiting restriction would start from its junction from this road for 15 metres on the eastern side in a southerly direction. You know, it was really complicated. They're now all digital, but as part of that process, we asked the supplier to highlight any restrictions, both lines and signs, where they didn't comply with the TSRGD, traffic signs, regulations and general directions at the time. Now, that doesn't change very regularly. When it does, we, again, have our technical team that see what has changed. There's obviously always an explanatory note to say what has been updated. And we then proactively have a look at our system, because it is now digital, as to what that can impact, and then subsequently update the signage. Thankfully, it isn't updated too often. Thankfully, when it is updated, it's actually adding things like where technology changes with pay by phone, you know, that's one recent addition, and things like red routes and red lines, you know, they're becoming more prominent and more popular within England and Wales. So again, they just add explanatory notes and amendments to that as and when. So yeah, thankfully, I think for our team it doesn't change too much, but that's how we get around that thing, because we did that huge piece of work back in 2016, which was ultimately within the NEP area funded by the surplus that was made by the NEP on-street operation. So previously we wouldn't have been able to do that had the NEP shared service not exist. So again, it's, you know, one of those innovative things that we've tried to reinvest to improve, digitise, you know, coming to that original point, the parking management that we're delivering within the area.
Councillor Billy Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Richard, Jake. Essex County Council is the local highways authority, yet the highways function is outsourced to yourselves and I guess Ringway Jacobs on repairs. To what extent is there a role for the highways authority to hold you accountable on all aspects of decision making, and can the local highways authority calling or challenge a decision made by yourself?
Yes, the joint committee is an Essex committee, and it invites the lead authority to take part in that under agreement, and then that agreement is then shared with the other partners. So that's how it works. So we're governed by Essex County's governance process post-meeting decisions. The call-in process is Essex County's call-in process, and I think that's 2 members, however that works, can call in any decision. So yes, we're overseen by at a county level. It is their function they've delegated down to the joint committee. So yes, yeah.
Councillor Wendy Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking through the responses. On the table, under the implications for council if we were to exit the NEP agreement. On the last bit, consequences to the council. You've mentioned the terms for leaving, which is calculation of deficits. And whilst the overall operation is not in deficit, if the operation were calculated on a district by district basis, Braintree would be operating on a deficit. Can you just expand a little bit on that for me, please?
Yeah, I mentioned when the partnerships were formed, it was formed of all of the districts' individual agency agreements that they had with the county. And at the time it was formed, the county used to have returns from each of the districts. So we know, and we published in our report this time last year, the equivalent of that work programme for last year. A little introduction in that showed the history to all of this and where things came from. And there were only 2 districts that were operating outside deficit in North Essex, and that was Colchester and Epping Forest. All of the others were operating as a deficit. We were fortunate that if you put that all together, and that's always been the joint committee's approach to this, is that we're all in it together. So it's an all Essex approach, if you like. We're all in this together, so any surpluses made in one area is a surplus that's shared by NEP, and we can use that across the whole patch. It is the case that Braintree and Uttlesford were in a deficit before, as was Tendring, and Harlow was borderline previously as well. There's various reasons for that. It's a huge rural area here with not all that much in it, and every beat that we go on outside the urban areas we have to use a patrol car for. So everything we do has a cost associated with it. If we were to split that back down into district by districts, we trialled this, although it wasn't something we'd had overseen to be something we want to publish, but we have done a little trial basis of how we'd split it up again. And yeah, there was still the case that there was just the 2 that were in surplus there. Now the agreement's very complicated in the way that it's written, and some parts could be said to be in conflict with each other. But the way it can be read at the moment is in order for the district to leave the on-street operation, it would have to give notice at the 31st of March. Now, there's a bit of a dead rubber in this if you think about where local government reform comes into it. So if you were to give notice at the 31st of March, and it would now be 2026, you'd have a full 12 months and you could leave at the 31st of March 2027. I think where local government reform is coming along into this, so you see why I say it's a bit of a dead-end process anyway. And at that point, 2027 is when the deficit or surplus amount would be calculated. And if you wanted to leave then, Braintree would get the baseline of services still provided by the Joint Committee, but it wouldn't have any say in it, but it might have to take some of the share of the deficit. But having said that, the Joint Committee has generally approached this to be that we're joint and several in this, and we'll share the surplus out amongst ourselves. When it comes to the end of it, and local government reform will probably cause the end of this agreement at some point, it might get moved down the road a little bit because it's one of the things that's working and between the 2 authorities at the moment. But at some point there's going to become a reckoning, and that's why we were quite clear that we want to get the thing as efficient as we possibly can be to get out of deficit and be in a surplus overall. So that is never a question we have to approach. Yeah.
Councillor Courtward, please.
Thank you, Richard and Jake. Just going right back to basics. What is the NEPP's priority? Is it safety, traffic flow, accommodating cars, business, pollution? I mean, there are so many different things to consider. What is actually your purpose? I mean, what are you aiming to do?
Our raison d'etre, if you like, is to keep traffic moving. And if that were the case and nobody contravened, then we'd never issue a penalty charge notice. And that's probably the panacea, isn't it? That's our paradigm that we're heading for. We've got a parking management plan that's online, which we've published, and that's got our links through. So the golden thread, golden rope, if you like, is up to the county's local transport plan. And in there's a number of aspirations that the county has, currently planning for the next LTP. I think we're in LTP 3 at the moment, a long-lived document. It's for about 15 years or something, and things changed during that time. Environmental impacts in particular, and different things have changed. But yeah, so we're supporting, there's 4 key themes in the LTP that we support, and to that we add another 3 or 4 in our parking management plan. So the full range, and you're right, anything from health to the environment, you can see a route through all these things. But fundamentally, it's about keeping traffic moving. And if there's some vehicles in the way, that's causing some congestion, that's causing an environmental issue, it's causing people to have extra time in their journeys. The restrictions are there pretty much in all cases, bar some extreme safety ones, just to keep traffic flowing. That's what we're really about.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Richard and Jake. Can I just ask a basic question? In a couple of the slides, you allude to the fact that you do not report to the joint committee the off-street activities, which I have been aware of. Can we be assured that, nevertheless, the income, and presumably that operation is done on a surplus basis, that is included in your consolidated results, in addition to what my colleague, Councillor Holland, mentioned, the consultancy income? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just reiterate how we fund the two sections. So the on-street is completely ring-fenced within the income that it can make from its on-street operations. So in there, it's penalty charge notices, residence permits, residence visitor permits, some pay to park at the curbside, some odd things like dispensations. And our time for that is completely ring-fenced to that account, as we have to, under statutory guidance, account for that under the Road Traffic Regulation Act. Section 55 says what you can do with your on-street parking. The off-street parking is funded by each of the districts. So we're not chasing penalties, we're not about anything other than just doing the work in car parks. So at the start of the year, we'll agree an amount of money to be paid from, in this case, from Braintree to Colchester, direct under a service level agreement, for some services that we're going to carry out. That used to report to an off-street version of the Joint Committee, but just the off-street councils were members of that. And that was all right at the start. The original agreement that we had with the county facilitated that to happen. But we stopped that at the halfway, well, it's just over halfway point. I think it was 7+4, the first agreement. At the time that was being renegotiated with the county, we also renegotiated the off-street agreements. They were coterminous with the first part of the first agreement, 7 years. So we renegotiated the +4 slightly differently with the off-street partners. And at that point, we were able to have a look at the way things worked. And at that point, Epping's off-street went back to Epping Forest as well. So we took it all apart, looked at it in a slightly different way, but it was still being funded as it was throughout. And we introduced this concept of the client officer into that, and the client officer is named in the contract, and we have quarterly meetings to manage that in sort of the same way as we do with the on-street, but it's done in much more of an open book way. So we're a true partnership in those terms. And we'll do a little bit more, a little bit less for some more money or less money, in terms of some places will ask us to look more after their machines. In Colchester, I do a lot more with strategy and so forth. So you can pay a little bit more, and that's where some of the consultancy element comes into the off-street as well. But that's funded as opposed to having to live off its own income that it generates. So the income in off-street car parks remains with Braintree. The decisions on tariff in Braintree remain with Braintree. The assets in Braintree remain with Braintree. We just operate a service that floats on the top for a price, essentially there. A slightly different way of looking at it. And we took it out of the Joint Committee at the time the agreement was renegotiated.
If I may just follow on, but at the end of the day, one assumes that it's being done in those 4 districts on a profitable basis of surplus, and that is included in your end-of-year results.
Yes, yeah, we publish that in our annual report as well. Yeah, so you can see all of that. I think it is in surplus at the moment, the off-street. We were talking to the accountant earlier on about the end of the last financial year. We're in that sort of reconciliation period for last year at the moment. It's of great interest to all of us.
Did you want to ask? Let's go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Richard, I wanted to thank you very much for, because I believe you're responsible for the report to us this evening. I'm also grateful for the guidance from officers in the 6 key lines of inquiry, and these lines of inquiry came to us before your report. And so I kind of suspected that your report has been developed in light of that. And one of the results of that, if everybody else will forgive me, is that you have answered those in a fashion, and I do have rather a long history of looking at what you do in a very loose way because of another council. And what I can say about your report is it answers all of those questions, and because of my other knowledge, entirely to my satisfaction, so that when I get to question 6, what would be the implications for the council if it were to exit from the agreement? My answer to that is, why would we do such a crazy thing? Change costs money. And there isn't the money there, sensibly, to change something unless we've got a really good reason to do it. We've got a really good reason not to do it. In fact, we've got multiple ones in your report. But the key one, as far as I'm concerned, is local government reform. Your report suggests or says that even if we decided, unwisely in my view, to exit the current agreement, we would exit at the same time. The shadow council would have been set up to become the unitary, and that council would quite sensibly review this in its own right, and equally sensibly, in the interests of tidiness, I would hope that the unitary would fundamentally merge your activities into itself, and there wouldn't be a named NEPP, because you would be the new, I would hope, North Essex unitary. So a key part of our work, as set out in here, is to work out whether we should take that step. And I would argue that we don't really need to do that much more by way of research into this, because the evidence is succinct and before us. I see absolutely no reason in anything I've seen to find fault. And therefore, I'm afraid it's my view that we can bring this work that we are undertaking as a scrutiny committee, because of what you've done and because of the organisation's history, we can make this a very short process, Chairman. And just to prove that I'm not changing my colours, because I always like to ask interesting questions, there's only one thing that in all these years that I've looked at this that I'm not comfortable with. So I just want to set that out and find out what your view is on it. Because I think going forward we need to look at it. And it is this. In the past, and for example, when Braintree looked at increasing the car parking charges, particularly in the town centre car parks, your organisation, sorry, not necessarily you, your organisation produced a report to them, and in that is something which I always think is something that's incredibly important, which is we came into this and we'd already agreed we were going to look at cost-benefit analysis. The economics and the numbers are seriously important, and sometimes the numbers are difficult to think about or difficult to obtain. Economic impact assessment. So I'm just going to run this by you. This was a long time ago, could be 2010 or something. And your economic impact assessment modelled 5% and 10% of current users, then current users, voting with their feet, and what the impact of that would be on Braintree District Council's finances. To me, and I know that you will quite rightly say we are only advising Braintree District Council, but what I would say is that advice has a certain degree of authority. The economic impact assessment is narrow in that it doesn't look at, for example, town centre car parking, what the economic impact looks like on the economy of the town centre. And we have lived, because I'm very old, I have lived in times where car park charging has been brought in, and during those years we have seen the decline and fall of the town centres. That's true almost everywhere, but then so has the dynamic shift in car park charging across roughly the same period of time, my lifetime. And so my question to you is, do you see it at all as your responsibility to do the hard sums and work out what the implications are on the economy of a town centre, for example, of your recommendations? And I say this and with the greatest respect, which is genuine, knowing that in the past I've seen your reports, and what you're characterising, or your organisation characterises as economic impact, is only one small side of this. And we as councils have an enormous obligation to deliver growth and economic prosperity to the communities we serve. That was a long-winded question, wasn't it? I'm going to be nice and say no, Ron.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, we're here to manage traffic. That's what we're here to do, and that's in car parks terms. That's what they're there for. You're putting car park to help manage traffic in the local area. That's what the legislation says, and we're duty bound to work together to make that work. Now, I always, in terms of car park charging, you've got this awkwardness. The analogy I use is like carrying a tray of coffee. I might have said this at the Braintree meeting before. I've used this before. So on one side you've got policy that you must adhere to, and that's supporting the county's local transport plan. On another side you've got town centre vitality. On another side you've got your own income to the council, you know, it's substantial in some cases, and your own policy, you know, your own development policy or whatever it is. And if you tip that tray of coffee to one corner any more than the others, you just end up with a mess. So you've got to have this balanced scorecard essentially. And this is where parking is one part of place, which is a much bigger thing. In Colchester we've been looking at a place master plan, and as part of that transportation is a theme, and as part of that parking is a theme. So it's a piece within a much bigger jigsaw, and put the jigsaw together you get the full picture, you know. So yeah, it's a part of a thing, but as we discussed earlier on, it has so many other impacts. It might be health, it might be congestion, it might be safety. There's all these other little things that it strings out into. It's a really important thing, but if you want the larger place piece of work to be done, that's quite a lot more than just looking at tariffs, but it's a really important piece of work. And there's some very good consultancies that look at place in a holistic manner. And yeah, I'd recommend looking at that at some point. Yeah, so all these other things into which it flows, it's one part of some parts of a thing. Yeah.
Chairman, with your forbearance, as ever. It's an interesting answer, and broadens the issue rather than addressing what I'm asked you directly. So, to the point, I believe that for us to change anything on this council would be profoundly unwise. That I've already said. But what I know is we are moving towards a unitary authority. And as I've already set out, your organisation will be subsumed into, integrated into, I'm sure there's another aggregate, or I forget what the proper word for this is in council speak, but the bottom line on this is you will cease to be a separate entity advising councils which are other, and you will be part of that unitary. Do you think that your organisation, as it is integrated into a future unitary, will have to take account of the fact? And let me tell you why, because I've done some of the modelling to try and work these things out. So for me, it's difficult. I'm sure there's somebody with knowledge, which I haven't got, who can do it. So if you just resort to anecdotes, there is a council not a million miles away from here, not in this county, that you have advised in the past, who have started charging. And what I have observed, because that is actually the service hub and where my doctors are, things like that. So I see this place very often. What I have observed is I never struggle to park in the town since they brought in charges. And I haven't done any survey work around the place to find out what's going on. But it clearly changes behaviours. And I think that going forward, given the ability we now have to do much more effective modelling, it would be naive or irresponsible if we didn't do that sort of modelling to work out what the impact of the recommendations is, because I know hitherto you haven't made the decisions. But would you agree that that sort of economic impact assessment on place from the recommendations is something that any future organisation that you're a part of should be looking at? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be very unwise for an organisation not to consider the bigger picture. You've got to look at the data in behind it as well. I know the other place you were talking about as well, and some of the things that were happening there. So it may be long stay parking has been dissuaded, and that might have been the answer to the thing they were asking about in this other place, in that people were moving the car at lunchtime and buying another ticket for the maximum stay. Those sorts of things go on. So you've got to look at behaviours as well in the parking thing. But yes, you're exactly right. The whole economic piece, and I mentioned this, balanced scorecard of things. Any organisation would be foolish to ignore at the macro level the economic benefit or disbenefit of doing any particular thing. Yeah.
I think this trade is...
If I can reassure Councillor Holland, I've got a few more working years in me and will hopefully be a part of the unitary as it stands. From my perspective, and I've said this to Esme and other Braintree District Council officers, we've had a really strong relationship at NEP with Braintree officers. As one of kind of the founding members, as we sort of refer to it, way back to 2008, we've had that really strong relationship, whether that's been with Samir and Paul, who predecessed Esme and Charlotte, but we continue to have that strong relationship. And whilst from an outside perspective, it might seem like we are just a contractor or just another organisation, we are quite passionate about delivering a service that's right for the community. That's the core sort of value of NEP, is having a shared service that financially works, but also, it's conscious and it responds to the local need as well. So from my perspective, and reassurances as much as I can give, the economic impacts is beyond just an increase or a decrease to footfall based on just charges alone. I think. Is narrow-minded at the time. What we're referring to may be all the data that we had, but in a digital age where we've got so much more available to us, and certainly some really experienced consultants within the industry as well that we've recently lent on for Colchester's car parking and place strategy, I'm confident that actually if there's other avenues that this new unitary authority were wanting to explore as part of that economic impact, then absolutely we can include those. And be honest, if we can't, and we might just have to take a punt. But that's part of what we're doing, trial and error to a certain degree, but being really data led where we can be.
The one piece that I actually wanted to add on to what Councillor Holland I agree with nearly everything that he has, all that he has said, is that one of the reasons we are here tonight is because of the news breaking in the local paper, rather than any of us here knowing of the potential introduction of parking charges in the high street of the three towns, and the fact that there was no prior notice, and it seemed very to have a complete lack of transparency, and to everybody just seemed to be a money making exercise, which was going to potentially do great financial damage to and viability to the town centres. You explained most of this to me beforehand, but for the benefit of the committee, I would like to go over it again, because, as I say, that was something where when a councillor gets asked a question that he has no idea is coming, is when we dislike them the most.
Yeah, if you want me to go over the, there's a bit of an elephant in the room with on-street parking. So the real reason for doing that is to make our service more efficient. At the moment, with limited waiting in particular, our CEO, Civil Enforcement Officer, has to go and gather some data about what's parked there. And if it's 1 hour, no return within 1 hour, they come back about an hour later and gather the information of everything that's parked there again, and they can see if they've, well, they can see who's there. They then have to come along again an hour later to see who's returned and who's still there. So they've had 3 visits now to do 1 job, and that's to find out if anybody's overstayed. And if this is going on for 6 or 7 hours during the day, 8 till 6, they've got to come back an hour later and see who's still parked there. And they've got to do that every day without fail. If you convert that into something where somebody takes a ticket, and that might be for a cost or it might not be for a cost, they start the stay at a known time, and if the registration mark is involved with that, we can see what's been parked there without us doing those 3 visits. We can come along and make 1 visit and see who's still there and is allowed to be. And there is quite a bit of this sort of shuffling between places that I alluded to before. There's been some empiric studies done on that. A chap who wrote a lot of that has just died, actually, Donald Shoup, Professor Donald Shoup. Look him up. He's really interesting to find out about the connection between paid parking and the local economy. And there's been some other studies done about if you take all the parking away, does it really have an impact on the local economy? So I'll talk to you a bit more about the place stuff with some empiric studies about what's been going on there. But the real reason for doing all of that is to make our service much more streamlined and efficient, so that we don't have to keep going back and back and back. There's nothing in the legislation that allows us to do it at the moment in a more efficient way than the only other option is to put a machine in or to ask people to get tickets. There's no, the legislation doesn't allow anything else innovative. We're stuck in 1984 with what could be imagined then, as that's when the regulations were introduced. The elephant in the room, of course, is that generates an amount of money. You know, if you ask people to pay for parking, an amount of money is generated as a result of that. And as the elephant in the room, and if you're not careful, one starts to overshadow the other. But it's what you then do with that amount of money that is generated and what share is given back to the local economy or improvements are made to the local area with the money that's generated. And we've shown before with some partnerships in West Mersey and Dedham and some other places that if you put that back into the local economy to improve toilets, let's say, or to improve local services, grass cutting, whatever it is, things that can be done locally, there's an amount of money, and our regulations allow us to do things for environmental purposes and other things if some money is made. You don't have to make any money out of it. You can start things on a ticket, and that suddenly, you know, if you turn the whole thing on its head, if our service is having a cost to it and the taxpayer is having to subsidise a deficit, everybody's paying for that rather than just the service users. And there's the political decision in all of this, and that's why we have a joint committee. I'm just an officer who makes some recommendations, and the politicians will listen to what their constituents and their electorate are saying, and they'll come to a decision. But again, you've got all of the economy on both sides to look at for that. It's a complex place to be, and when we're up against it, you know, we're looking for efficiencies in things. Well, there we are.
Thanks, Chair. If I can elaborate on some of the history that kind of led to the Whittam and Halstead paid parking proposals as well. So you recall Richard mentioning about post-pandemic there's a deficit on the NEP on-street reserve fund. And off of the back of that, there was a very lively discussion at Joint Parking Committee about how we respond, what do we do. Meanwhile, there was again an officer-driven conversation with all of those partnering authorities, not just client officers, but at a Section 151 officer level, to kind of work through some ideas, how we financially recover from that. And it's probably fair to say that not much come of that besides the idea of upgrading some of the limited waiting places, parking places, to paid parking sites. And I use the word paid loosely because actually it includes unpaid, so free, but there's just a different method for initiating that stay. And we mentioned it again in the briefing, so I'll mention it now, but statutory guidance, the purpose of civil enforcement ultimately is compliance to the parking restrictions that are out there on the highway, but also in car parks. And ultimately the paid parking proposals that we put forward was a way of creating efficiency of managing that compliance. As Richard said, there's a lot of human involvement with limited waiting, logging, and with the increase of salaries, other inflationary factors, getting to a point, quite frankly, where the cost benefit of managing that curbside, we may have to decide as a committee, I say we, it will be the members of that committee, but it may be that that's just not enforced as a result because it's just, there's no cost benefit, there's no benefit to that cost. So one of the proposals that we put forward was the paid parking, and we did offer some sites. We did pass it through client offices informally before taking it to a joint parking committee. And there was a few reports due to a cancelled meeting prior that just compounded into this one meeting. And I think it's pretty fair to say that we've learnt from that the staging of the paid parking, how we did it was wrong, and we needed to have approached that in an entirely different way. It was called in as part of the calling process that's at county, and we responded to that call in and come to an agreement. That agreement did ultimately include us going back to the committee at the next meeting and confirming that we would have an informal and informal stage, that formal stage actually being the statutory consultation. But we would then focus on Colchester and Epping Forest districts first, then coming to Braintree and Harlow later. And that ultimately happened towards the late part of last year, the informal part of the proposals, us reaching out to all of the county, ward, town, if applicable, members for those Whittam and Halstead sites to get some feedback, informally, get some feedback, engage with us, talk to us, what are your concerns? And as part of that process, what was initially just changing the limited waiting to pay and display, then changed to we will actually have a free period at the beginning, so we will retain the free period of parking that is currently offered at those sites. And then if you wanted to stay longer, so therefore increase the economic potential of that area, you could then pay to park to stay longer. We then had some further feedback on we hadn't proposed to include machines, physical machines, and that would increase accessibility at those sites. So again, we agreed that we would install those machines at those sites, an unconfirmed number of machines, but again, we're looking for guidance on what members, the local community, will actually feel would be viable at that site. As well as footnoting the fact that if you are vulnerable, disabled, you've likely got a blue badge, and if you did display that badge, you would be able to park for free for as long as you like anyway. So that informal process is what we then presented back to committee at the beginning of this year, first committee meeting of the year in February, where it was then agreed unanimously, I believe, that we would take those sites to the formal statutory consultation, which is, as we spoke about, I believe, earlier, coming in the next couple of months. And again, once we get a bit of a steer on when that will be, we can give everyone a forewarning. We're not trying to put the wool over anyone's eyes. We're trying to be as transparent as possible, and yeah, what comes of that comes of that. But ultimately, we're trying to be more efficient in delivering that compliance, whether that's a problem for now, as the NEP administering parking management for Braintree District Council, or whether that's a problem in future, and whoever the unitary authority is, and whoever those officers and members are at that point, and whether that's a problem for now or then, that's totally up for, it's totally up to be discussed and seen, and we'll find out ultimately at the back of that formal consultation, which we've agreed, whatever the outcome is, we will bring that back to the committee for a discussion and a decision. So, there's definitely a history, definitely some lessons learned, but there is definitely some misconceptions about what's being proposed and some of the compromises that have been made by officers based on the feedback from residents and members of the local community, both at district and town council level as well.
Thank you. Councillor Ramage, please.
There's one thing you didn't touch on, that's appeals. I mean, do you have, you had stats for PCNs, but do you have stats for that? I.e., how many do you get and how many are successful?
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I won't try to pull wool over your eyes and guess. It's something we can certainly come back to you, though. There's, as Richard said, there's 3 stages of appeal. So we've got the informal challenge, which is when the notice is originally issued to the vehicle or handed to the driver. We've then got a formal representation, which is then when a letter is posted to the DVLA registered keeper to inform that there's an outstanding fine. And then the third and last stage is an independent appeal with the Traffic Penalty Tribunal. So there's 3 stages of generally appeal that's available to everyone, which, that whole process is regulated. And we have statistics on the number of appeals that come at each stage, the number of appeals that are either accepted or rejected at each stage as well, and also the number of PCNs or percentage of PCNs that are paid at each various stage, because that's, the appeal stages are just the beginning, tip of the iceberg as far as notice processing goes. But again, I won't get into that and bore you.
Who actually does the actual process of doing the appeals in your organisation?
We do. So yeah, so the business process team that you would have seen on the slide, led by Lou, Christine Belgrove, we do all of the appeals, informal challenges and formal representations in-house. If a penalty charge notice on street or off street goes to the third and final stage, that's with the independent adjudicator, which is called the Traffic Penalty Tribunal, and they are governed by the patrol, which is parking
and traffic outside London.
Yeah, parking and traffic outside London, essentially. Parking and traffic regulations outside London. People sometimes assume that parking is a black and white industry. It's not. There's a lot of grey area.
Yeah. Okay.
It's fractions of a percent that get to adjudication, though. Yeah. We published stats before. We'll send you a list of how it goes. Yeah.
Anybody else? No? Right. I have to put glasses back on there. Right. Right, thank you. If there are no further questions, on behalf of the committee, I would like to express our gratitude to Richard and Jake for your responses and for taking the time to attend and assist us with our scrutiny review. I would also like to acknowledge the huge amount of preparation that you put into this, which I believe has answered the majority of our questions before we got here tonight. It was really welcome, and thank you for that. We would, of course, be grateful, if necessary, that we continue our communication with you and ask for assistance if needed as we progress. And I will ask our scrutiny officer to keep in touch with the committee, as the committee may need to seek some clarifications, as Councillor Ramage has just asked, when preparing its report. You are welcome to stay, but you're also free to go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the kind invite, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
in reporting an accurate number of participation. The percentage of household waste sent for recycling, reuse and composting, as is anticipated over the winter months with reduced tonnages of green waste. The kilograms of household waste collected, where a higher outturn in October resulted in a missed target for the quarter overall. The percentage of fly tips cleared within 24 hours, where the target is 100%, 6 were missed due to vehicle issues and an administration error resulting in a missed target. The percentage of invoices paid on time, which is due to be considered to staffing changes in areas where there are high payment volumes. Business rates collections also saw a reduction against target, where additional rateable sites were introduced in the third quarter before there was an opportunity to collect before the end of the reporting period. And collections for council tax saw a minor fluctuation compared to the previous year, although that can be expected year to year. There were then 4 performance indicators which missed their target by more than 5%. These were the time taken to process housing benefit claim changes, where changes to the local council tax support scheme has changed the profile of cases, which is resulting in fewer cases, but the ones that are remaining are more complex. The percentage of calls resolved at the first point of contact in the customer service centre. The CSC continues to receive a large volume of calls in relation to complex matters, which has reduced the outturn of that particular performance indicator. The percentage of stage 1 complaints responded to within timescales also missed target due to a cluster of overdue complaints in August. In the third quarter, I don't know what says August, so I'll come back to you on that one and amend that. And also the percentage of disabled facility grants that were approved within timescale, where the council has received an increased volume of DFGs across the 24-25 financial year. In addition to that, the council has made a number of key achievements in the third quarter. 31 cases of homelessness were prevented, 113 affordable homes were delivered, and 123 businesses received support. In addition to that, the success of the Fellas Fair resulted in a second event being organised and the creation of an ongoing Fellas Forum. The community safety social media campaigns reached in excess of 48,000 people. The landlord incentive scheme has seen 38 households assisted into privately rented accommodation to date at the end of the third quarter. The jobs fair saw very positive feedback, with 95% of attendees saying that they would recommend the event to somebody else. The refurbishment of play areas and skate parks has enhanced community spaces both for children and young people, and work continued at pace at the Whittam Leisure Centre, with solar panels visible on the canopy, as I'm sure most of you will know that's now completed as well. So the financial summary, the position at the end of the third quarter showed an overall positive variance of £2.5 million, with 3 main areas contributing to that position. Firstly, Treasury management income, which is projected to outperform budget due to a combination of higher for longer interest rates and increased cash balances. Secondly, the uptake on the garden waste subscription service was higher than originally anticipated, and the better than expected performance on Treasury management and the garden waste service should now be reflected in the budget that's been approved for next year. And the third area is the council tax sharing agreement, where an improved third quarter has resulted in a projected increase in the shareback of income from the major preceptors. While asset management and sustainable development are projecting an adverse position, in both areas this has reduced from the position reported in the second quarter. Service charge costs and lower income from lettable space in Causeway House has been partially offset by the extra commercial rent income from within asset management. The main reason for the budget variance of sustainable development remains a projected underachievement of income from planning applications, but has been partially offset by net underspends on staffing and receipt of one-off government funding. There is a small improvement in the position for the environment, compared to the previous quarter. However, an adverse variance remains related to increased staffing costs in building control, coupled with a forecast drop in service income. This part reflects a difficult labour market at the time of new regulatory requirements. Capital expenditure for up to the end of the quarter was £3.2 million, with the main areas of spend being on community facilities, climate change projects, shared prosperity projects, and grants for residential disability adaptations. There is currently a projected underspend across several projects totalling £426,000, and slippage of continuing projects into next year is forecasted to be £3.6 million. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Before I invite questions on the report, please can I remind members that the purpose of bringing the report to this committee is to scrutinise the overall performance of the council in the third quarter. please can I also remind members that this is not an opportunity to request updates on individual projects from the officers in attendance. Tonight we'll not be able to advise on these, and there are other channels for such requests on this committee's functions. Do members have any questions regarding performance in the third quarter as set out in the report? I can confirm that the work has started on Whittam High Street, and the crows in the Mill Lane area are very upset with the new bin because it's got a lid on it and they can't throw takeaways all over the car park. Holland, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Tom. I've got nothing to complain about. This is a report about a council that, to my mind, is functioning well. I went right the way through the long document, and every instance where there is something where the performance isn't exactly where we want it is explained. The explanation for me is entirely reasonable, so I don't have any sort of complaint to make there. I do have the usual one that I really would like acronyms to be explained at first use. So I was wondering whether the DFG was a new Chinese electric vehicle, but it seems it's something much more important. We do need to make sure that our public documents work for the public and not just for people like me. But overall, this council and its activities seem to be in rude good health and well managed. So I have nothing to add to that, and just thank you for the report.
Thank you. And just to address your point of expanding acronyms, I do my absolute best to ensure that that happens. But as you can imagine, there are a great deal of acronyms within the report. So if there are any examples that you've spotted, please let me know so I can make sure they don't happen again. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Van Dalken, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Tom and Tracy, for this. Two things. As I think most here will be aware, we are now at a few months on, and of course the solar canopy in Whittam is there and a great success, providing enough power, especially during the summer, to power a very expensive operation and to have some surplus. So that's good. The couple of reds, they are as they have unfortunately sometimes been to do with waste, and as again we all know, a project is coming forward to basically change the way in which we do collect and recycle, and those reds will presumably be no more. Anyway, thank you again for a good report.
Anybody else? No? Right. Thank you, members and officers, for your responses. If there are no further questions, we have been asked to note the third quarter performance report. Please can I take it that the report has been noted? Thank you. Thank you, members. The report has been noted. Thank you, Tom and Tracy, for your report. And we will now proceed with item number 8, which is the decision planner. Members, for this item, we've been asked to review the planner for the period 1st of May 25 to the 31st of July 25. Do members have any issues that they would like to raise in this respect? No? Right. Thank you, members. Please can I take it that the planner for the period the 1st of May 25 to the 31st of July 25 has been noted, with a show of hands, please. Thank you. Thank you, member. The decision planner, I don't know why that's not coming out tonight, has been noted. And with that, we have no any other business tonight, so I will declare the meeting closed at 8:57? 53. Oh, please, put my glasses.